Hello, welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to another edition of This Week in Rugby, or Last Week in Rugby, or rugby news in general. Without further ado, let's get into the items here that I've got written throughout the week. The first one I've got written down, RG Snyman is going to be undergoing surgery, meaning that his season is cut short. I don't even know if he's going to return. He seems to be out for a long time. This is a huge loss for Munster. Obviously, they've got some guys that can come into the backups and hopefully get an opportunity. But at the same time, I think losing RG Snyman's huge. And RG Snyman himself, it feels like, man, I was looking forward to watching him play a full domestic season. He was one of my favourite players in the World Cup. And obviously being part of the bomb squad, he never played a full 80 minutes. I was looking forward to seeing what he can do if he's given 80 minutes consistently at Munster. And unfortunately, that is cut short. And man, I'm gutted for him, gutted for the fans, gutted all in general. It sucks, man. Hell of a player, and Munster are going to miss him for sure, no matter who they've got in reserve. So, yeah, I don't know what to say. It's a shame. He's one of my favourite players. So, it's a rough state of affairs for RG Snyman and Munster themselves. So Finn Russell is started off quite hot for Bath. He comes back and he tells Gloucester to shush. And I think this opens up a wider debate of, should we respect the kicker? I don't know. What are my thoughts on this? I definitely feel like as time's gone on, respecting the kicker and being quiet is starting to shift away from that, and people are now starting to make more noise, especially if they feel like their team has been unjustly had a penalty awarded against them. The home fans generally start cheering and booing, and I don't know. For me, I think it just plays into home field advantage. If you've got a home game and your home fans pissed off and they see the opposition get a kick that they think is maybe unjustified, or maybe it's just a kick and they want to try and put them off, I don't know if it's really the worst thing in the world. Sure, there's like the unsportsmanlike conduct, like kind of general conversation, and then it's kind of like, is this a gateway drug into further hooliganism and something we really want to avoid with rugby? Maybe, I don't know, but I don't know if I see a huge issue with it. I think it's fine. I think letting go of some of the old ways of always respecting the kicker when they're kicking, and just letting home field advantage play a bit more into it. I think, I'm not totally against that, to be honest. But it was pretty funny to watch Finn Russell shushing the Gloucester crowd regardless. So that was a funny highlight from last weekend. Leicester Harlequins, that was a belter of a game. I was there, obviously, created the video. Please go check it out. It's doing better than I thought it was for two clubs that, are British clubs, English clubs, and I don't think, the English Premiership is the most watched of the domestic leagues. URC is definitely more, so appreciate you people watching it. That was more something that I just enjoyed doing while I went to the game and watched Leicester unfortunately get beaten by Harlequins, but it was a great game. And even though the Premiership is I would say less, as I already said, is less popular than leagues like the Top 14 and the URC, I'm excited for this year's competition. I mean, I just mentioned Bath and Gloucester. They're two very competitive sides this year. Northampton look hot as Leicester and Harlequins, they look like they're brimming with talent and they could do well this year. Obviously, Saracens always look great. Just trying to make sure I don't think I've forgotten anybody else that's playing really well. I think they're probably the main ones. So there's a lot of competition for that number one spot this year. Sale, of course, also look great as well. So yeah, I think the Premiership, this is going to be a good year for it, to be honest with you. So if you don't watch much of the Premiership, this is probably the year to tune in. There's a lot of great sides out there, and I don't know if it's going to fully translate into Europe and then being competitive, but it definitely will be a competitive Premiership for sure. As I've already touched on, Northampton looked very strong. They looked especially strong against Exeter. Man, they were playing some great rugby. We had We had Finn Smith, who is putting forward his case for England fly half in the future for sure. He looked very talented. And Northampton are really playing a really good style of rugby, and they really dominated Exeter at every stage of the park. They were very, very quick, and they look dangerous, Northampton. And I'm not looking forward to the derby match between them and Leicester. I think they could beat Leicester quite handily next weekend, but we'll see. I'm looking for a bounce back from Leicester that looked a little bit rusty, and hopefully the rust has come off a little bit. So should be a good game this weekend. On the subject of that game, I think the red card against Exeter was dumb as Finn, like, just looking at the challenge, the guy goes up in the air, and I think putting it in slow-mo makes it look so much worse than it was. Finn Smith is fine afterwards. I don't know who this card is protecting. I don't know. The guy, sure, maybe his leg is a little bit like high in the air with catching the ball, but like the reality is that sometimes you do that. If you're jumping in the air and you've maybe just gone a little bit too far forward, you're trying to counterbalance yourself going backwards, your leg's going to get stuck up in the air. I don't think you can really call that that's on purpose in terms of a challenge. And Stuart Hogg said the same thing in the coverage, and I had to agree with him. I don't know about that red card. I think it was a little bit over the top. Speaking of over the top cards, I've just watched a video of a yellow card for someone running at Dupont hitting his face on them, and someone getting a yellow card from that. I think it was Perpignan against Toulouse. Man, what are we doing? This is another example in the same weekend of cards that just were unnecessary and are just ruining the game. So, come on, man, let's do better. Harry Arundell scores a hat-trick in his debut for Racing Metro. Which is great, but those of us a bit more astute will notice that his defensive efforts were less appealing. Yes, he looked great in attack, but man, in defence, he looked lost at sea. And I think this is probably why we're seeing in the same game why he has so much potential for England, but at the same time is very raw and still requires some work. Kind of encapsulates Harry Arundell and where he is in his game at the moment. So I think he's a great player and he's got a huge future ahead of him. But boy, that defensiveness needs to be cleaned up quite a bit. Italian teams, this is something that I've noticed in the URC. They seem to be holding a bit true. Benetton is 6th, which is pretty good. And yes, the other team, Zebra, I have no idea. But they're 11th, but they just won. And I think they really showed some fight, a lot of fight the week before against the Stormers. Is this going to affect Italian rugby in the future? Are we going to see better Italian clubs? I definitely think that Fiji benefited from having a good domestic team that was competitive each week. I think it definitely helped with their international rugby. And I think we all just hope that this is going to do the same thing for Italian rugby as well. So I'm really hoping that this has a knock-on effect of making Italian rugby more cohesive. Maybe they need a good coaching staff to kind of take hold of that potential that this time in the URC is doing for them, but only time will tell in that regard. And a new section we're going to go for here. I'm going to call this Who I Like the Look of. Yes, so over the last weekend, I think there were some particular players that I'd like to mention that I like the look of, and I'm looking forward to watching in the future. As I mentioned in my Quins Leicester video, there are 2 players from that. I think Kata for Leicester, inside centre, is a really interesting prospect. I believe he is Tongan, and he played in the World Cup, and he's come over, I think, with Dan McKellar. I think he played for the Brumbies, I think. I could get that wrong, could be another Australian side, but that was the first game I've watched him play when I was watching Quins play, and he looked really good. Not only does he look like a powerhouse, but I feel like he's got a bit of trickery around him. I saw some kind of like basketball pass passes to players to try and be creative and create spaces, and his footwork looked really good as well. So I'm excited for him. Lewis Liner for Quins. He grabbed my eye last year in the games that I did watch Quins. Obviously, he's the son of Michael Liner, but when he sprints, he looks like he's the quickest guy on the pitch, and maybe another winger for England. Who knows? I mean, I think he's claimed that he wants to play for England. Not too sure on that, so don't quote me. But when I was looking at Quins, they definitely said that he was of English descent. So we'll see how he goes. Arundell, as I said, that raw talent for the hat-trick that he scored. regardless of what he did in defence, I think you've got to take notice of that. That's very special, and not a whole lot of players can do that. And as I said already, Finn Smith, I think he was sensational for Northampton, and I can't wait to see what his future looks like as well. Tom Curry injury might keep him out till Christmas. This is sad news to hear. I think he had a really good World Cup, personally. He's a great player. He's great at 7, even for his bigger stature as well. He's great jackal over the ball, and I think Sale will miss him for sure. I really enjoy him as a player, and it's really rough news to hear that for him, especially as I believe he had injury problems last season as well. So that's really rough to hear for Tom Curry. Mateo Carreras, one of the best players in the Argentinian squad and one of the best players for Newcastle, has announced that he's going to be moving to Bayern at the end of next season. And to be honest with you, I can't blame him. I think it's rough playing for a team that struggles every year. You never really see tangible improvement with them up in Newcastle. They've got some great loyal fans up there, but they never really compete. As much as there is turnover in the Premiership in terms of who's good and who's bad, Newcastle always seems to stay at the bottom. And I think it's really compounded when you play winger as well. I mean, I can't imagine being like the coldest spot in the UK, being that far north, and also being on the wing and never really receiving the ball, especially with the talent that you have. I really don't blame him for trying to move to Bayern and get more attacking rugby. I think Bayern are pretty good, still getting my head around top 14. I wish him all the best at the end of the season, and I think it's a good move for him, to be honest with you, to improve his rugby. And some 7's news. Dupont will not be playing in the Six Nations to focus on the 7's. This is really, really surprising. You would have thought that Dupont would be wanting to solidify the French 15 team following their World Cup and all the positives that were from that. He was so instrumental in the team, and he's someone to really build around in the future. Maybe he's thinking it's just the Six Nations, which is crazy for me to think that way, but maybe he's thinking it's not the World Cup, this is the Olympics, it only happens every 4 years, and therefore I want to be more involved in that. So, I mean, more power to him. I think he'd be a fantastic 7's player. Maybe I haven't seen him play 7's, but I think he's got all of the skill set to do it, so fair play to him. But yeah, I thought that was a really surprising piece of news, and it'll be interesting to see who France bring in at scrum half to replace him. I remember the replacement that came in, I can't remember his name, but he did play very, very well. He wasn't quite Dupont, no one really is, but he was a really good stand-in for him. So that was a bit of surprising news for me. Michael Hooper is also going to be playing in the 7's as well, who I'm not so sure he's a 7's player for me. We'll see how he does, but that's what he aims to. That's what he seems to be aiming for, and more power to him. You know, I hope he does all the best. I feel like it was really rough of him to be left out of the World Cup squad by Eddie Jones. So yeah, I wish him all the best. And that's it for me. That's it for a bit of a weekly catch up. I hope you enjoyed it. Got any comments on what I've said? Agree with me? Disagree with me? Please, abuse me as much as you want. Put it in the comments. I'm trying to respond to more and more comments every day. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in.